two characters that have really been sticking out in my mind are the characters of Patience St. Pym and Urgence Evergreen, the two ice elementals, not only because of who they are, but how they relate to Simon's mental state. And I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff here because of the dichotomy and the similarities between these two characters and how they directly affect the outcome of the entire narrative while also being seemingly insignificant due to their very little screen time. They obviously have a massive amount of weight in the actual story, whether it's from thousands and thousands of years ago or the present day. Hear me out. I'm going to ramble about these two characters like an insane person because I think they're actually pretty awesome, and they're not really talked about that much, especially because they were introduced later on into the series. So I want to give my sort of spotlight on these two characters. For today's video, there's going to be no face cam. Right now, I look like I have a sniper rifle aimed at my forehead, and I'm not showing you guys that. Thanks so much for all the support. We're almost at 8K, almost 2,000 away from the tattoo goal, so if you could subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. There's a large percentage of you who are not, so it would mean a lot. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is Urgence, obviously, since he was someone who was introduced into the narrative millions of years before the actual story began. Urgence obviously was the person who created the crown, as a result created Simon, which obviously makes him a key character in the story. Ice King is based off him, and a lot of the stuff that is inspired from his character is very emblematic of what ice is meant to represent. Something that's cold, something that is distant, and something that makes you feel very introverted. And I think that's really great because Urgence has this sense of superiority, that they are able to control all the people around them and do whatever they want to. He feels as though he's the smartest man in the entire world, so it's perfect that someone who also considers themselves a genius like Simon, when in reality they fall to something that was completely out of their control. In Urgence's case was the comet that was going to create the Lich. Now I think this aspect of his character is actually really interesting because even though he's seen as a bad guy through and through, he genuinely is a hero. He's just incredibly self-absorbed, and that's what makes his downfall feel so satisfying but also tragic at the same time, which I think is a very interesting way of showing that someone who is constantly isolated can never truly be someone who is seen as a good guy. It shows how Ice King, as he evolves throughout the story, becoming friends with these people is bettering him in the long run. He's no longer this villain, he's just a normal person, which I think is absolutely amazing because the crown was meant to be a sort of caricature and a pastiche of what Urgence was through Gunter's point of view. And we're not going to talk about Gunter in this video, that's a whole other rabbit hole, so we're not going to get into that, but that stuff as well. Incredibly interesting. But on the topic of isolation, let's continue that trend into Urgence's reincarnation, Patience. Instead of being in a completely isolated world where it's only very few people that can understand her, Patience is in the normal human world that we live in today. She has millions of people she could talk to. Yet when she sees that the world is going to end, she chooses to isolate herself. She realizes that the end is inevitable, and instead of choosing to accept that everything has to continue on this cyclical path and a new ice elemental has to be made, she chooses to isolate herself and stay as the ice elemental because she views herself as better than everyone else. She can continue to live on regardless of if everyone else dies, and I think that is really interesting. Instead of choosing to be a hero, like Urgence, they realize that the world is doomed due to the Lich and their premonitions, so Patience just chooses to let it happen. Obviously, their names are very emblematic of this. Urgence, I need to stop the Lich. Patience, I will let the Lich exist. Evergreen is a sort of tree, obviously. St. Pym are computer trees, meaning a bunch of different pathing that computers can do. So it is still a tree, just a more technological and modern version of what a tree can be. It's a reinterpretation of the idea of a tree. Now you could argue whether or not you would consider Evergreen a good guy or a bad guy. However, many people would say that Patience is undoubtedly a bad person. And I think that the attribute that connects the both of them together to a T is the fact that they are very focused on keeping things the same, keeping things frozen and unable to change through the Catalyst Comet, whether it be preventing it from happening in the first place or not being affected by it at all. It feels as though these characters are always absurdly focused on ensuring they stay in power and they have that superiority over other people. I also think that aspect is absolutely amazing because it can show how these people can have very similar values while being interpreted in very different ways throughout the world's history. So, as we know, Patience obviously survives and makes it to the land of Oo that we know, and she becomes very similar to Urgence in this sense. When she first ever appears, she realizes, oh, I'm superior to everyone else. Do you want to be my underling? Which is obviously another great comparison to Gunter. Ice King was created using Gunter's will in order to beat Urgence, so I think it's really awesome. Now, Patience obviously views herself as very, very above everyone else, and instead of choosing to become friends with people, she thinks she's very much above everyone else, but before actually isolating herself, she actually makes the attempt to become friends with the other elementals, such as Bubblegum, Flame Princess, and Slime Princess. However, when they dismiss her, she then chooses to withdraw and isolate herself. And we see the full ramifications of this in the Elements miniseries, where Patience obviously is set up to be a major antagonist in the story and chooses to completely alter Ooh forever in order to be whatever she wants to be, her most extreme form possible. However, when this plan completely goes awry for her, she chooses to really personify what the Ice Elemental is. She is distant, but she's not really negative. The Ice Kingdom turns into a kingdom of apathy and genuine sense of depression, and I think that's really interesting because you would think that Patience, who is so driven, would in turn just let herself become filled with anger when what she wanted didn't happen. But we see that even when she's first introduced thousands of years in the past, that she is willing to just let things happen. So her being very apathetic, I think, was actually incredibly interesting. And it goes to show that Ice can personify many different things. However, it always comes back to the main theme of isolation. Simon is sort of meant to embody every aspect of what Ice can be, whether it's the cold, distant, and superior values that Urgence had, or the very lonesome and apathetic side that Patience had. Patience is the reincarnation of the man who made the crown. The crown is what caused Ice King to be who he is. Patience is what caused Betty to develop her plan to stop and successfully save Simon. If there was a universe where Ice King did not find Patience underneath the Ice Kingdom, there could have been a universe where Ice King and Magic Betty would have been together happily. Just because Patience decided to throw a little wrench into everything, things turned into a completely different direction. And I talk about this in one of my previous videos, make sure to go check it out. Although there's a ton of people who say that Simon could have easily been the Ice Elemental, I personally completely disagree with this statement because Ice King and Simon together are both completely different from characters like Urgence and Patience. Instead of being incredibly prideful and selfish, they're the opposite. They're incredibly selfless and constantly feel better being around people and not being lonely. Meanwhile, characters like Urgence and Patience sort of thrive in that sense of loneliness and solitude because there's that sense of stability and that people won't have to worry about things changing as long as nothing has to, because you won't interact with anyone. It feels as though Ice King's interactions with both Urgence and Patience is what allowed him to finally realize who he is at the end of the day. And I think that's really compelling. That's going to be it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think of these two characters, because as I said, I think they're really, really cool and very underrated. I would have loved to see more of them, especially Patience, obviously. Patience I thought was really, really cool, even for as little time she got. I think she had a lot of potential. Also, if you enjoy this type of stuff and want to continue the conversation, I have a Discord. I haven't promoted this in any video I've done over the past month, but yeah. Link to the Discord, in the description, if you want to continue the conversation. It's going to be it for me. Hope you take care, and have a good one.